Okay, you're gonna go live.
We're good.
Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to the special virtual school committee meeting. Pursuant to Executive Order number 20-05 issued by the Governor of the State of Rhode Island, this meeting will be conducted by electronic communication only. Members of the public wishing to access and view this meeting may do so at https:// youtu.be/8 capital O capital J lowercase u gr 45 capital M2K. This community meeting is open for you to view for the long-term high school education vision developed by Warwick stakeholders from the schools, the city, and from the community. The educational vision articulates future educational practices and future facilities to support them. The vision was developed as a foundation element for high school education and facility master plan developed by specialists and consultants. We did have a link up, so we will have the questions that people answered. So I'd like to do the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance.
Excuse me, before we start, where is the flag?
It's right there, Karen.
It's fine.
Right up on, behind them on.
It should, like, I don't have one on this computer, but we really should be pledging to a flag, so the picture should be there.
Thank you, Ms. Bacchus. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so we're going to start our new business, and that's going to be the community forum for high school master projects. And we have Mr. Locker again to start.
Yes, all right, thank you. And I've got with me Ed Bourget, who now appears in person instead of just his name. We met with you at your last meeting, and the presentation we're going to present tonight is the same one. So this is the one that you've reviewed, and we're eager to receive any community comment on it. With that, I'm going to share my screen and run through the PowerPoint presentation. All right. So we have a presentation in about 12 slides. I'm going to jump, in the interest of time, I'm going to just gloss over two of them and get right to the essence of the presentation, of the concepts that we developed. As already mentioned, we're going to cover education and facilities because they're interlocked, and in fact, that is the way the RFP of the city and the district was written, and we were pleased to respond to it for those reasons. We're going to show you some overall diagram of what a school concept would be, talk about guiding principles, and then share the options with you, master planning options. We had an elaborate process that was orchestrated in the early months of this year. We then went on hold with COVID, and now are pleased to be back with you presenting the concepts of that. In essence, everything that we'll be sharing with you tonight was developed just before COVID. However, we've made some amendments in terms of the costing because the schedule of delivery was upset based on the year out with COVID. So we held visioning concept meetings with about 50, 60 of your stakeholders. They took several days. We focused on issues that were specific to Warwick and Warwick high schools, but also incorporated global thinking and best understandings about the shifts in education today. I want to underscore just a couple of points. They focused on 21st century learning, which is what the RFP was asking us to do, but also what we would want to have done. And it's what I specialized. I work across the country and around the world, focusing on 21st century learning and teaching. Among the other concepts were that learning and teaching can be integrated and interdisciplinary, quite a challenge for high schools because so many different teachers are certified in different subjects and they carry with them traditions of teaching only in their own domain. But we know the world is interdisciplinary and your stakeholders wanted that to filter into the high school. One of the keys to 21st century learning is to recognize that the student-teacher relationship is very important to student learning. And this planning that we're doing builds those relationships intentionally, primarily by strategically locating, positioning teachers and students. You want to focus on essential skills or social emotional skills. And research is now telling us that this is the very foundation of good, positive student learning, something that we weren't even discussing as short ago as 20 years ago. You want project-based learning where students learn through active learning. You want student collaboration, and hey, that's the way the world works, and we're bringing it into the schools. A shift to longer class times for deeper learning so that the learning is not interrupted by the bell. And this is a very important one, to offer CTC programs in both schools so that no matter where a student lives, they can partake in programs that are going to give them a boost to getting to a career path. Increase in experiential learning. And this is one that is not much talked about, but really critical to developing continuing teacher professional development, synchronous teacher teaming, working together full-time with a larger cohort of students. And that visioning group also developed facilities concepts, a primary one of which was flexibility for continued change. So the idea is not to make facilities that are new or renovated but are stuck in time, but to make facilities that give the administration and the teachers flexibility to change things as education changes. And we fully expect that it will be changing as the 21st century unfolds. Arranging spaces of small learning communities, this is a way of developing relationships. Use all the circulation for learning that we possibly can. Flexibility, there's that word again. Interdisciplinary, there's that word again. So these concepts start in education and they filter into the building design. And then change the furnishings to give more empowerment to students to learn in different learning modalities, more flexibility for teachers to direct how that learning is happening. This diagram captures the essential ideas. It's a relationship diagram, and the key spaces are shown as different circles. They're color-coded. These are classrooms. These are science labs. The green are science labs. The gray is CTC, and the shades of orange are various community-related spaces. But the essence of this diagram is that it can apply to both renovation and new construction. And what your stakeholders wanted was a strong community zone, a zone that had safety built into it, was close to drop-off parking, and had in it the major functions that community members might expect to use. Auditorium and gymnasium, yes. Dining area, and in this case it was conceived as a hub of the school, and it might actually be the lobby, but these are also important. Steam spaces, weight rooms, etc., so that these expensive facilities with very specialized equipment could be used by the public nights and weekends. STEAM, by the way, is science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, integrating subjects, but relying on tools. Media center is the center of the school, and then the classrooms and the tech labs are distributed around, hopefully very close and equidistant to the media center. Sports fields, and yes, we're building new sports fields in different options. So that essentially is the big concept, and it's applicable to both new construction and renovation. So as Ed Bourget and I developed overall master planning concepts for both of the schools, we carried these concepts. Incorporate the educational vision and the community responses. And I remind you that just before COVID struck, we had a presentation to the school committee, and then shortly thereafter, we presented the vision and concepts to the community. We had a great meeting at Pilgrim, and we got a lot of feedback on it. And that feedback informed the way we developed the options. So what we had basically shared with the vision, and then we got feedback on that, and it informed the options. We looked for practical, cost-effective planning strategies, making decisions that are really relying on our experience for doing this work for many, many years, but looking to watch over public funds and be careful of spending. And we developed a range, sorry about that, of building and site options. The RFP did have some options for us to study. We reviewed those, we augmented them, and for various reasons, including community community comment, we did not do them. 3 were required, were asked of us. In fact, we did not do the one that looked at a single building for all students in the district, but we in fact did 9 of them. And we did them in a range from least invasive and minimal construction to complete new construction, so we could see the whole territory. We incorporated the synthetic football field. That was a city initiative while we were doing our study. So those costs are in our study, and the location is a part of that as well. Our work incorporated meeting all current codes, including handy-free and barrier-free access, the ADA, and then these are planned to be upgraded for all building systems. So we are bringing state-of-the-art mechanical, electrical, wiring, upgrading structure as necessary, building envelope, better windows, better insulation, et cetera, and bringing them to a quality standard that would be expected of new construction right now, whether it's new or whether it's renovation. So these would be, when fully done, whether it's a renovation or new construction, the kind of building that you're going to want to own for the next 50 years. And in fact, you will be owning it for the next 50 years or more, in fact. So with that, let me show you some planning options first for Pilgrim. As I say, we developed 4 options, and they ranged from option A, which was the option where we kept most of all the options, we kept the current footprint. Those of you familiar with Pilgrim know it's got an entry over here where my cursor is, right after the drop off and the small amount of the parking. And then it's got a series of building blocks, some of which were added over several different years. It's got the corridor that doesn't have any functions along it that comes off to this building in the back. And then a gymnasium in the back. Now, this is very interesting because we are working to meet all Rhode Island Department of Education guidelines. We sized the square footages of the building to meet their standards. And in fact, they would be providing a good percentage of the money to build these buildings. And they, like other states, when they provide partial funding, they have a whole series of guidelines and requirements that we have to follow. And one of those is how large the building should be to serve the student populations projected. And that dials down into the details of sizes of individual rooms, et cetera. So this square here in red represents the size of an addition that would be required to meet those, to increase the square footage to meet those RIDE guidelines. So this was the one that was the least invasive. It kept most of the footprint, and it had a single addition. The next option B took that addition and then began to filter it in so it was more strategically located, thus improving educational delivery by correlating with existing spaces and making them more functional. And a key point here is that Pilgrim has a number of very generous courtyards, great for light and air, but they're relatively underused. Ironically, they're in the middle of the building. So what we are proposing to do in option B is take some of that square footage and put it on the edges of the courtyards. You can see the square boxes in red here and in here. And by doing so, we are changing the educational functions that are next to those courtyards and doing so in a strategy to get better use of the courtyard. So for example, if these were science labs that opened up into the courtyard, then we could use the courtyards for growing things, for experimentations with growing. We could use it for experimentations with the sun, etc. And it becomes an outdoor lab for students. Another one could be used as a recital area or poetry slam area, etc. And so while this is study level work, we know that this approach has great potential for making those courtyards active and interesting. Option C continues the progression of rethinking where the additions might go. And in this case, this is the first option where we are proposing to concentrate the building, concentrate the additions to make a building where the distances from one function to another have been significantly reduced, thus allowing us to remove this at the building at the back and the building at the left-hand side. And what that does for us is it makes connections much easier. And contrasting C with A, one of the primary characteristics of 20th century schools, particularly high schools, is that they were not designed with attention to relationships. They were designed, in fact, to keep all the departments apart. And one of the consequences of that is Pilgrim. It's a case study of it, where you get long, long corridors going past rooms that you don't even use because you're trying to get to the next department. In 21st century planning, and I would say that option C is very good at 21st century planning, we're looking to build relationships. We're looking to put science department next to math. We're looking to interrelate different subject areas, and in partly to get interdisciplinary, but also partly to build a community of educators who actually get to see each other in the course of the day. So we think option C achieves that. But a primary characteristic of C is it does one more thing that the other two options, A and B, did not do, is it brings together the spaces commonly used by the public. If you remember the planning diagram, it asked that we take auditorium, gymnasium, cafeteria, even a STEAM lab, and make it easy access for night and weekend use. And option C has that. So even though it is a renovation, it's a renovation addition, we've achieved good 21st century planning. The next option, D, is one where we explored what new construction would look like on the site. And when you're doing a high school, the best way to do new construction is to build the new building on a piece of the property that does not have a building on it, and then move the students and the teachers into that building and then tear down the old. So that's exactly what we've done here. Proposed to build a 3-story building in this corner of the site. That allowed us to remove the existing building. You could just see the footprint here. And then build a rational, concentrated parking and drop-off zone in front of the building, but then also reconfigure the playfields so that they're easy access, but in fact, we are increasing the number of playfields. Oh, and I forgot to mention that the option C, which does concentrate the building in a smaller footprint, does allow us to add playfields. We've added tennis courts, and we've added a softball field over here. And that's similar to option D. So those are the four options that we developed for Pilgrim. You can see the costs on them. These A and B fairly close together, a jump to get to C, and then another jump to get to D. These costs were done in 2021. Well, they were done in early 2021, and we've seen inflation since they were done, and we will show you adjusted costs for a future bid date based on a later bond referendum. So that's Pilgrim. Let me show you Tollgate.
Mr. Locker, before
Yes, sir.
you go on, may I ask you to go back to the Pilgrim slide, please?
Yes.
On option C, can you just go into a little more detail on what the front of the building is, what that addition is? I don't think you touched it.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Let me get a sip of water. So the notion here is that we would concentrate our additions to the front of the building, to the street side. And by doing so, we accomplished our goal of bringing in what I call the big boxes, the cafeteria, the auditorium, the gymnasium. But we also met another goal of creating a new expression for the building. This would be a two-story addition. It would have all the features of good high school planning, good, nicely sized windows, but not too large, windows that are designed to push light deep into the room and would have some protection over them for glare, etc. And for all intents and purposes, it will read as if it's a brand new building. We did give this one a title. It doesn't appear on this sheet, but we called it the Community Hug, in part because of the way in which it brings together functions that they were most likely to use, but also because this new facade, this new statement of Pilgrim High School will be one that is very 21st century and appropriate.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. Tollgate. So we did 5 options here. And I might mention that as I glossed over before, we did not look at a single building for all of the students in Warwick for a couple of reasons. Number one, when we mentioned that as a possibility in the community meeting, we did not get any favorable response. And of course, one of the big issues, well, there's 2 big issues. That would be a really big high school, wouldn't it? And number 2, where in the world would we put it? And so there's not a lot of land options. And so we decided, instead of focusing on that as an option, that we would focus on those that seem to be appropriate relative to the existing conditions and the vision and concept. And these, of course, are options that could never have been conceived when the request for proposals was developed. These are options that come out of knowing the buildings and knowing what your stakeholders want to have for their future. So with that, let me focus on these Tollgate options. These follow the same approach that the option A, the lowest lettered one, is the least invasive of the existing building. And on these drawings, they're all consistent in their orientation. The drop-off is right here, right through the middle. The career tech and library and cafeteria block is here. And then the academic block with the gymnasium is over on this side, parking over here. And then the sports fields up here. And the drum rock on all of these schemes is proposed to be removed with its functions consolidated, and then it turned into a playfield. So we're picking up 2 playfields here. One is on the side of drum rock, but also one over here on the side of the synthetic sports field. So this scheme, which I say is minimally invasive, does have an addition, again, because the ride standards call for more square footage per student than you currently have in the building. But beyond that, this scheme achieves its upgrades largely in place. And that means that it remains in the big block. It remains a largely windowless building. So by having an option that makes minimal change, but upgrades windows and mechanical and electrical, et cetera, finishes. It doesn't do anything for the lack of quality of light in the building. The next step takes a direct charge at that and cuts a hole right where the current media center is to bring light and air into the classrooms that surround it. I think it'll have a phenomenal benefit because it just turns out that where that media center is, it's strategically placed and surrounded by classrooms. So this makes a big gain in terms of light and air, but also sense of building and sense of place. The media center gets moved over a little bit. That's the turquoise. The addition is still over in here. That's the only practical place to put addition. And then you'll see some small red borders here on yellow. These are the bridges, and what we're proposing to do is widen the bridges and make them usable for learning or social spaces. So right now, they have the same characteristics of many of the corridors in traditional 20th century buildings. You can't do anything in them except walk. We're trying to make every square footage of this building usable for other things. So by widening those bridges, we can do that. We can put functions along the side. The next option, which is C, continues this idea of the center of the building as a light-filled space, but in this case, we propose to move the library back into it, but make it a space that's rather like a food court in a shopping mall, an atrium in a hotel, with light coming in, flooding in from the roof, and then the classrooms that are along the edge will get their light through that central space. We've been able to do one more thing with this, and that is to extend that space down to the drop-off area. Right now, the Tollgate entry is rather ironic that it is a very large building serving many students, but the entryway coming in at the drop-off, because of the rock, is relatively small and relatively isolated from the building. In fact, you're not really aware that you're entering a very large building. It has no sense of publicness. It has very little graciousness. And now it's got security controls, which further have narrowed it down. And our proposal here is that this space that has the library in it would be stair-stepped down to embrace an entryway at the lower level, probably separated with glass for reasons of controlling the wind, but also for controlling security. And we think that this change is going to completely change the character of the existing building, with, in fact, relatively minimal changes to that building itself. And we call this scheme the heart of the school. This scheme has this new center of school, traditionally and appropriately the library media center, and we think that this is going to create a completely new definition of what Tollgate High School is and what it means, the heart of the school. The next two are schemes where we were working to meet the goal of building a brand new building. But we didn't quite do that because of good practical reasons. The best place to build a new building is on the downside of the drop-off. So the drop-off is here, and the building that creeps up the side of the hill has been completely removed in this proposal and replaced with parking. And over on this side, we kept the cafeteria, the career tech spaces, because in fact, they're pretty good. And it would have been foolhardy to simply tear them down because we're supposed to do an option with new construction. So this portion is existing. That would be lightly renovated. It's not in bad shape. And then the addition would be a 3-story building on the site of the parking. So the parking that was displaced would be over here. And we've got it tiered on several different levels out of necessity, with a stairway between the parking levels modeled loosely on the Spanish Steps in Rome, that iconic 3 coins in the fountain space that in fact navigates many floors of change, but does it in a way that makes one like walking up and down. And I would expect that this will be a kid magnet, particularly after school, sunny days, and of course during football games, just as I expect on C, I didn't mention this, that our heart of the school library media center food court concept is going to be a kid magnet as well. So this is D, and then E or D alternate takes that same concept, but makes a heart of the school here as well. So D borrows the planning concept of C, of making a usable space that's symbolic and appropriate, and puts it in the middle of the school. Otherwise, it is identical to the D option, which had a courtyard here at the very center. And with all that said, if we take a quick look at the costs, we see that option A, B, and C have costs that are hovering pretty closely to each other, within a couple $1 million of each other. And then we get a big jump to go with D and D alternate. We get a $25–30 million jump to get to these two. So that is the total of the different schemes. I'm going to jump and show you then some ratings that we did on them. Our planning team, Ed Bourget and I, took a look at both Pilgrim High and Tollgate High and gave them ratings based on a number of consistent considerations: safety and security, length of travel across the building. Again, this is that distinction between 20th century planning and 21st century planning. Nobody cared about it in the 20th century. We care about it a lot in the 21st century. Natural light, whether it achieved 21st century functional planning, that was an expectation of our visioning team. Whether we have safety and logic in sight and circulation and parking, and then what the cost was. And we scored these, and it turns out that our option C of Pilgrim came out the highest, and similarly our option C for Tollgate also scored the highest, and I'll show you those in more detail in just a second. This sheet also then registers what the costs were when we did this planning in the early part of 2020, and then escalating it by an amount that we think is reasonable. Although I want to underscore its future. We're in crazy times right now. The construction market is booming and costs are going up. COVID-19 has had a phenomenal impact on the construction business because of scarcity of materials. And so it's an educated guess to look at what the escalations would be, but we did project them to a future bond vote and got increases projected to be probably in the $4 to $7 million range. Well, obviously 3.5% to 5% each. So these are for the record, and I do want to underscore, because of the uncertainty of our times, this amount of escalation is our best estimate, and of course that projection will have to be updated as time goes on, so that we can keep everybody appraised as to what is accurately going to be. So with all that said, here is our scorecard for Pilgrim with our recommended option. This is the community hug with the major addition across the front, concentrating public functions, but also a good number of classrooms, decreasing walking distances from place to place, rationalizing the parking, and adding, by reducing the footprint of the existing buildings, being able to add more tennis courts and a baseball field. Then for Tollgate, similarly, it is option C, the heart of the school, with the the iconic Kid Magnet Media Center right smack dab in the middle, exactly where it should be. And I believe that is the last slide. Yep. Okay. So with that, Ed, Ed Bourget, my partner in planning on this, do you want to add anything to what I have said?
I think you pretty well hit it, Frank. It's very similar to what we were talking about last week. I think I'm glad that you brought up the fact that the costs, the escalation factor is something to think about with the costs. And I think you made great arguments for the two schemes that we selected and recommended.
All right. So how would you like to proceed from here? Shall I stop sharing and we can see people's faces, or shall I keep this on in case there's questions that are targeted about particular slides?
Can you put the slides up as people ask questions?
Yeah, I can try that. I guess the only question is how quickly I can toggle back and forth
Okay.
from sharing screen. But let's try it. And if it turns out I'm not
Okay.
if it turns out I'm not very talented about toggling back and forth, I'll just leave the screen share on. But
Okay.
but I will say it's a pleasure to see people's faces in these COVID times.
Exactly. How are we doing the community call-in?
They submitted questions, right?
Right, you have 5.
No, they did not submit. They were allowed to ask a question
Oh, okay.
in real time.
They're in a waiting room kind of thing.
Oh, Darlene is one of them.
So we have Ms. Necko. Would you like to ask your question? She disappeared.
Yeah, is she still in the room?
No, she's in here, but it seemed like she might have had an audio issue. Ms. Netko, if you can hear me, you're currently muted. I'm not sure if you
I did that on purpose.
okay.
Would you like to ask your question?
Who?
You.
Oh, me. Okay. Sure. I didn't realize
Disappeared.
I was
Yeah, is
first.
she still in the room?
No, she's in here, but it seemed like she might have had an audio issue.
No, I didn't. I muted myself.
No. So whoever has it on YouTube,
I did that on purpose.
it's coming through.
Oh, I have it on YouTube.
Who?
You.
Oh, me. Okay. All right. So I'm on.
You're on, Darlene.
Okay. All right. Hi. I'm Darlene Netco. I'm a lifelong resident of Warwick. I went to Greenwood, Windman, and graduated from Tollgate. And I was involved with the community stakeholder meetings with Mr. Locker, Mr. Bourget. And as the school committee said at its last meeting, this is an exciting time. This is actually something good and positive for our city. And it's about time, because both of these schools have serious issues that need to be addressed, and they do need to be kid friendly. And, you know, it is nice to hear things like the heart of the school and a big hug, because they are 20th century schools. They don't have the proper infrastructure. They don't have, you know, every now and again, electricians have to come in and rewire things. The Tollgate English department book room is a very scary place with all of the computer wiring that's in a glass box with everything spilling out of it. So this is a wonderful opportunity for our city. And I hope, you know, that the bond gets passed. We need HVAC. We need windows at Tollgate. You know, one of my questions is, though, in the option C, where there will be windows into this atrium where the media center is, those windows won't be giving fresh air, though, right?
That's a detail that we would need to work out. And I'll ask Ed to comment on it, but I would say that our role models for that space are several. One are there's a number of hotels that have been built with a central atrium, and the hotel rooms look out into it. In those cases, many of them are operable, and it's really a matter of the mechanical system design. There are a number of buildings, schools in England, in the United Kingdom, and I did a lot of work there 10 years ago. So I've been to these, and they have this same planning concept. Well, we can find out how those were done, and how well they've worked over 10 years. So shopping malls with multi-story food courts, hotels that have large atriums, and then other schools. And I work around the world. We'll find them. But I think your question is a great one. That concept is very different than what we're used to, but it does have precedence. And so I'm confident that it'll be just right. But it takes a lot of work to get there. Ed, you want to add?
Yeah, I'd just like to add and emphasize what Frank's saying about these are planning ideas. We're sort of laying out a roadmap. This is the first step. So we haven't really even gotten into design. And there's going to be many opportunities to kind of take what we're envisioning here and as a group, engage all the stakeholders and kind of go down that road and really start to dig into these types of details and ensure that, the community is getting the buildings that they want. But I think at this point, this is just sort of laying out the roadmap to get there.
Right. And with all of this, obviously, right now, Warwick already has passed a few bonds where our elementary schools and middle schools, if they haven't already, are getting upgraded HVAC systems and so on. And the high schools were left out of those bonds because of this planning process. So at some point, are we going to hear the plans for the HVAC system and air exchange for Pilgrim and Tollgate? Because both buildings are horrendous, as you all know. And in addition to the classroom spaces in these buildings, there are a number of individual offices that are windowless holes, tiny little windowless holes. So when all of that planning is taking place, are those going to be considered, and will the public be able to see some kind of artistic rendering to get it maybe a better idea than just the diagram on the screen?
Right. Yeah. Good questions and good concerns, because while it's, a broad brush to talk about classrooms, those spaces that people spend an awful lot of time in, like a school psychologist office, without windows, can be very deadening and actually counterproductive to good work. But to answer your question specifically, and Ed says, yes, this is the first step of a very long process. The district right now is procuring services that will follow our services, and that will include the detailed development of the buildings, including mechanical. And so I would suggest that it would be good to put on everybody's mental to-do list is, as that process goes along, simply keep asking the question. But I'll bet that proactive designer planners will know the sensitivity of the question and will share their concepts before you even have to ask them.
That's great.
That would be a good process.
That's great, because I know during all of the meetings I attended with you, you did have many photos and visuals, as you said, from around the world. I mean, and I noticed online, your document actually has visuals from an elementary school in Middletown, Rhode Island.
Yes, one of my favorite projects.
Yeah, well, if Middletown, Rhode Island can do this, so can Warwick, Rhode Island. And I know one of my colleagues who couldn't make it tonight wanted me just to ask, if, and as I think you've already answered though, but I said I would ask for her to see visuals of Tollgate and Pilgrim, like an artist rendering of what the heart of the school or the big, the hug would look like. So the community can see, I've, as I said, I graduated from Tollgate in the 80s. So the school was only 10 years old, a little over 10 years old then, and it was bad then. Tar leaking from the roof in the A building, big plastic sheets catching the gooey tar drippings and filtering them into buckets. And I started teaching in Warwick in 1990. So that's 31 years in Warwick, 26 at Tollgate.
Mhm.
And over time, both Tollgate and Pilgrim just have, devolved into less and less pleasant spaces, if they were ever pleasant to begin with, given some of their idiosyncrasies. Pilgrim has those windows, but they're above head level,
Mhm.
so you can't see out them and you don't get much air. And then, of course, Tollgate has the darkened windowless holes.
So I'd like to just jump in and add one thing here. Although we are proposing to reuse portions of these buildings, and I think there's some good bones there, reuse foundations and structure and so forth. The level of renovation, it'll be total gut renovation. In other words, all the systems will be replaced. All of the windows will be replaced. So in essence, when you walk through these spaces, it's going to feel and act like a new building, even though portions of it will be of the old building.
That's wonderful. And I have told people that, and there is precedent, like I said, in our own state. Pawtucket totally renovated one of their buildings, so it's almost like a brand new school.
Right, and Lincoln High School is doing the same at the moment.
Yeah. So, Darlene, in regard to your concern about sharing these concepts, I would comment that, for me, this has been a really enjoyable project to work on. And in part because the buildings were so challenging, and I love challenges, but I think largely because our team of educators that we've been working with are open and are consistently wanting to share and get feedback. So I would expect that their attitude is going to remain the same as things are more completely developed. And so therefore, I would believe that there will be a good amount of sharing progress as it is made. Just underscoring, however, Ed said, we're at step one of a very long process. But it'll be a good process. I really do expect, because of the way things have been managed. So Ed, in regard to Good Bones, a question was asked last week, and I'll ask it for you to clarify. The Pilgrim conditions related to water and soil stability and things like that. I think there's an urban legend about that.
Yeah, this came up last week. I've heard it before, where apparently people believe that Pilgrim has been sinking. And my point is, I've done facility assessments of Pilgrim, others have also, and there's really no evidence of that happening. In other words, there's no structural cracks or any evidence of differential movement within the building. I know over the years there was some evidence of water coming in. I think that's been addressed. It had to do perhaps over the years with the exterior envelope, but it's a really solid building. It is not sinking. And furthermore, when we do look at adding on to that building, there will be a geotechnical engineer who will do borings and get an understanding of the subsurface conditions so that proper foundations can be designed to support the new loading. So it's a solid building.
Okay.
Again, thank you to the school committee for offering this public forum, and thank you to you two guys who started us in this process last January. And then, of course, we had the pandemic. We had great meetings at Tides Cafe with all stakeholders involved. I worked at a table with Pilgrim students, and it was great having the current student perspective to be able to come up with these ideas that everybody shared. And, thank you, to the administration too. This is something positive for Warwick Public Schools. And I'm also, I should identify myself too as president of the Warwick Teachers Union. And so this will be the fact that your teachers were involved in this planning, and we will continue to be involved, is significant. And because we all really want just what's best for the students in Warwick. That's why we're all here. And they deserve new spaces and good learning spaces and 21st century learning spaces. So they develop the skills and, the desire to go out into the world and succeed.
Mhm.
So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Do we have
Thank you, Ms. Necco.
additional people in the
Thanks.
waiting?
We got somebody else in?
That's what I'm just asking. Do we have other people who are?
4 more. Mr. Locker, may I, since we're waiting?
Yeah.
Is obviously, as this progresses, this process progresses, we would see renderings and whatnot. East Providence is in the process of building a brand new high school, and they actually, about a year ago, released it was like a virtual video of what the new school was going to look like. It was really, really cool. So for a parent or a taxpayer, anybody for that matter, you just clicked on it and it kind of walked you from the outside, walking into the building, through the classrooms, to the library, then out to the athletic fields. It was just again, just a virtually done, a virtual video that kind of laid the whole thing out. This was very much at the end of their process. They were already under construction, I believe, or just beginning construction. So I mean, I would expect that as time goes on, so the public can see exactly what it is this is going to look like.
Yes, that's generally called a fly-through, and it's terribly exciting stuff. Relatively easily achievable with technology that's available now, so I would expect that would be in your future as well.
Are we letting someone else in?
I think Jeff said he's trying to get them.
Oh, okay,
Do you
thank
wanna
you.
ask if anyone else could?
Does anybody already in on the school committee or administration have any questions or comments?
I have another one. I got a million of them. Mr. Locker and Mr. Bourget, what I don't think you two gentlemen did either last week or this week was just to give a quick rundown of not your qualifications, but your bona fides, right? So, Mr. Locker, you said you worked in England and whatnot. I'm sure you've done work in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. So, just for the public's edification, what projects have you both done that would probably be familiar to, anyone who's been around New England?
Okay. So starting close to home, I've done about 25 projects in Rhode Island. I've done about 75 in Massachusetts and maybe 10 or so in Connecticut. And I'm the educational planner. So there are always architects involved that make the foundation work that I do, which is similar to what I did here for Warwick high schools, turn it into buildings and make them visible. So in Rhode Island, the renovation that we did for Forest Avenue Elementary School in Middletown was already cited. I led the visioning for Barrington Middle School, which was completed about a couple of years ago. I did work that's not in the nature of buildings, but I led a project-based learning initiative at the Career Tech School in Providence. And actually, I started in Rhode Island. My first project was doing master planning for the Providence Public School District back in 2003. There are others that are in construction. North Providence Elementary Schools comes to mind. That's, as I say, a work in progress. Jumping across the border, Attleboro High School is in construction and nearly done. Going a little further north, Stoughton High School, Sharon High School, Minuteman Regional Technical High School, and Diamond down over in Fall River, and the list goes on. As I say, there's 75 there. I will comment that I have worked in 10 or 11 countries, and when COVID-19 hit, I had 6 or 7 projects in 4 different countries. We're still working on them, but I'm not going there. And I started a course at Harvard University. It's now run out of the Graduate School of Education, and it's called LEFT. That's an acronym for Learning Environments for Tomorrow, and it is run out of the Graduate School of Education. And in that course, we bring architects and educators together, put them in think tanks, have them work together, and craft ideas for the future, both education and facilities. So in a lot of ways, what I do in the Harvard course is what I did with you. Ed, you want to add?
Ooh, how do I follow that? Okay. So I'm an architect. I have 30 years of experience. I'm a Rhode Islander. In Providence at the moment, where I live. 2 girls in the Providence public school system. But I primarily worked in and around Boston for the majority of those years, with the exception of working for SMMA, who's primarily a sort of known as a school K-12 architectural firm. I was in their Rhode Island office from 2013 until sort of the middle of 2016. During that time, I worked for 5 districts in the state of Rhode Island, primarily on repair work, because that was more or less what was happening at the time. One of the bigger projects that I was involved in before I left SMMA was bringing the Lincoln High School renovation addition project through the stage 1 and stage 2 process successfully. Obviously, after I left, that project went on, and it's being constructed at this point. I've done a lot of higher ed work, including the Pell Marine Library Center in Narragansett, the Narragansett campus. So my experience is a bit more diverse. I know Rhode Island very well, and Rhode Island architecture quite well. And this type of project, this type of complex sort of addition renovation project is something that I kind of focused on over the course of my career. So.
Thank you, Mr. Bourget. And Mr. Locker.
Yeah, thank you.
Are we letting someone in, Mr. Taylor?
They're in.
Oh, wow.
Excuse me. Hello?
I can't see who that is.
I can't either.
Looks like
They're not-
Kawin, K-A-W-I-N.
Yeah, they're not unmuting. Do you want to do that?
To the person who just got in that has a question, could you please unmute your self?
Was that the number that ends in 098? That's a different one. Okay.
Text Dr. Conley.
Okay.
All right, so they might not. Yeah, it seems like maybe they're not there.
I don't think they're there. Okay. Do we have anyone else? That's unfortunate. Ms. Bacchus has a question.
I sent you a message on Zoom, and I'm wondering if you could answer that.
Who to go to? I didn't hear the first part.
Who did you send the message to, Ms. Bacchus?
Talk- Frank.
Yeah, Frank Locker here. She sent it, was that just to me, Karen, or was that to everybody? Just to me. So let me read it. It's a good question. And Ed, I'm going to ask you to get unmuted, and I'm going to read it and then pass part of it to you. Karen's question is there a way that we might do a Tollgate D option with Spanish steps at less cost? It appears to be such a great plan. So the D option was a new build to the greatest extent reasonably possible on the downside of the bus drop-off area, but keeping the infrastructure of specialized spaces like the cafeteria and career tech that it seemed foolhardy to tear them down just to do a complete new build. But then we wrapped the new build around it and made a 3-story building. And the Spanish Steps idea was to take the hill that the current big building is on and make it civilized, put parking on it in tiers, but because of the grade change, you're going to have some space between where the parking bays can be and a grade level change of probably 1.5 stories, something like that. And that's where the Spanish Steps reference is to that iconic 3 coins in the fountain feature in Rome, where the steps are designed to basically to make you want to walk slowly and enjoy the views and enjoy other people. And that's why I referred to it as a kid magnet. So Karen, you're concerned about cost. The D scheme, and I'm not sure if, on the D scheme, and I'll make a global statement and have Ed comment on it. We put the Spanish Steps in there because we wanted to be sure that when all was said and done, we were making a concept, making a design that was public friendly, kid friendly, etc. That parking would be used undoubtedly for access to the new rebuilt synthetic football field up at the top, and we needed to be able to get people up to it. Functionally, we are required to have a ramp that goes up for barrier-free universal access, and of course, we would need steps to go up. So if we didn't build the Spanish Steps, we would still build a portion of what was tucked into them. And my gut sense was that the D option was the highest priced by about 30 million over the C option, if I remember right. But this and the Spanish Steps were a small part of that difference. So it would not. So if in fact we took the Spanish Steps out of the D option, then the almost new construction option, we would not come anywhere close to the cost of the C option. It would not reduce anywhere near what it would have to get to the cost of the C option. Ed, can you add anything to what I've said?
Yeah, no, it's a tricky site. And, I think that the Spanish Steps and the parking is just a way to maximize that site. I think with C, you have the building engaging the hill and making that connection. With D, we're responding to what now becomes an open space. We're attempting to get people up there. But I do agree with Frank that, the cost differential is just not going to put you back into sort of scheme C territory if you don't do the parking and the steps. I also want to just add, kind of related to that, I'm not sure, Frank, if this go around, if you mentioned that the Drumrock school facility would likely be demolished as part of this, and a field would also be built there. So there is a road in the back there. So I think, regardless of the scheme or even with C, there's the opportunity to sort of engage more athletic fields up there and create more of a destination perhaps than what currently exists.
So Karen, did we adequately understand your question and respond to it?
I think so. I mean, it's not just the Spanish Steps, but they'd be wonderful. But that whole concept, even though it's, over $20 million more is such a great concept and would really do a lot for the community, a lot for our schools. And
Yeah.
for the fields and everything else. So.
And as we were doing our, just to pick up on your comment, yeah, I mean, the D concept was really good. And our judgment about recommending C was largely because we thought that the functionality of C was pretty much equivalent to that almost new construction of D, but at a cost savings. So again, from that point of view of trying to make concepts and decisions that are prudent and watching over budgets, undoubtedly the fact that C was less expensive than D helped in forming our opinion of recommendation.
What I'll say here is that having had quite a bit of experience on the school committee, we've gone for the cheaper cost before and ended up not getting our bang for our buck. So I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, and I understand that situation. I would say that that your description of cheaper cost and not getting good bang for your buck would apply to A and B, which largely left the existing building intact without making a what's the word? I'm going to say this, and I'm not sure it's the word. A grand gesture. When we called the C scheme the heart of the school, it was because it seemed to us that that gesture, which was really driven by light and air, was going to turn that building into a building with an iconic main space and something memorable and a kid magnet. And so that's a grand gesture in my humble terminology.
One more question. I remember that you spoke about it last week, and for some reason I'm not sure which one. So what was your idea for the office, the main office location and presentation in item C?
On Tollgate?
On Tollgate.
Yeah, it's challenging because of the way there's rock right there. So we have not gotten to the level of detail of locating every single function, but I would expect that that there would be there's two types of administrative offices. One would be the one that has the principal and receives the public, parents would visit to it, etc. And that probably would be located on the second floor, immediately above the entryway and immediately off the library media center space. And then have distributed administration where the kids are. That's a current 21st century planning scheme. Instead of taking the kid to the administration, you take the administration to the kid. And that becomes a part of their daily lives as they're walking through spaces to get to their classrooms, et cetera. It's very different than a 20th century concept of being sent to the front office. So I do think that the C scheme gives us the strategically logical location for the administrative office. And by dropping the open space down to it, we can make a spatial and logical arrival that takes people gracefully up to that second floor. So that's even though, and there will be an elevator there, of course, but it will not feel like a series of contained capsules that aren't related to each other. And that's maybe an essential concept, an essential statement about how Tollgate feels. At least it feels that way to me. A whole lot of little and larger capsules that are confusing, even though they're orderly, they're rather confusingly related to each other. We're going to strike through all of that and make a coherent overall concept for the building.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good questions. Thanks for asking.
Dr. Thornton has a question?
Question for Frank Oriad on technology. I think when looking at building a building or having a building upgraded, we're often trying to, plan for the, what we have now in 2021. To think back 15 years ago, we had things called Palm Pilots, right? Cutting edge, not so much now. I'm not talking about the end user device, whether it's a Promethean board, a VCR. I'm talking about infrastructure. How do you build and allow for flexibility to upgrade? The CAD 6 wire of today is now CAD 12, whatever's coming in the future. How do you build and allow us to get access to, if to get access to an upgrade? Because I know in some old construction, you really can't get the things once you build it. So is that part of your process as far as how do you forecast what might be?
Yeah, and I'm going to pass the details on this to Ed, but both of the buildings are column and frame buildings with, and yes, they have concrete block walls, but they're not bearing walls. So that gives us a lot of latitude for being able to cut the raceways and make them accessible. The cavity of the ceilings are now increasingly filled with electronics. Ed, what's your confidence of being able to do state-of-the-art access and flexibility for change in these two renovated buildings?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said earlier, these buildings, although we're going to keep sort of the skeletal, the frame of them, the body, we're going to open these things up totally. The systems that are there now will be gone. We'll rip them out. We always build in flexibility, both spatially and technology wise. There's additional raceways and so forth. There's a lot of wireless, obviously, these days. So there's less sort of concern about data drops or as there was even 5 years ago, perhaps. So, we'll work through that with our consultants. There's going to be a lot of, and I forgot to mention when we're talking about our background, Frank and I are currently doing schematic design for an 845 student elementary school in Fitchburg. And we're kind of going through a lot of this stuff right now where we're talking with their IT people, the teachers, and we're kind of gauging what's important to them, what they see their future being like. And, it's not a one thing fits all. It's sort of, we get there. We have our consultants who are versed in the latest and the greatest, and we sort of build a consensus. So I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Thank you.
Ms. Bacchus?
I think this is for Ed. When you just brought up the fact of basically Wi-Fi and things like that. Right now, we have a lot of problems at some of our schools because they're concrete and things like that. It doesn't pass through well. Is there going to be something that makes internet and technology and things like that more available and accessible? Are we going to use different building materials?
Well, I don't know about using different building materials, but I can say that we'll work when we develop the systems in general with the consultants. They're going to be part of the design step by step. They're going to be aware of, the types of walls we're using. As far as if you're talking about Wi-Fi, there's typically there are layout coverage designs that occur, within our ceiling plans and so forth. So, the new building will have complete coverage. It'll be based on a calculated design from our consultant. I'm not sure what's happening currently. Are you saying that there's areas that aren't getting covered?
We lose coverage. There are areas that are very difficult. Sometimes there's not enough. Sometimes there's too many people on.
Yeah,
I think understand all the technology, but in the building.
I think in general, I'll just say that this will be a comprehensive designed building from ground up, even though parts of it may be reused, and it's not going to be sort of an added on system, which often we have to do to make buildings continue to function, but it's not always the best solution, or it's a difficult sort of, it's more difficult to enhance an existing system. So hopefully that.
it's awful when you're in the middle and this has happened to more teachers than I care to remember, but they'll be in the middle of a lesson using the technology and it'll go out. And especially, now the way things are, I think it makes it much more difficult.
Right. Well, I think the bottom line on it is that in our costing, we have carried complete replacement of those systems in the same manner that we've carried complete replacement of the Windows systems. And so we will build it as state of the art and certainly be cognizant of all of the history that you've had, and our technical consultants can backwards engineer to be sure that whatever is limiting your system today, that will not be built into the new system, because we're really wanting an infrastructure that's going to withstand the test of time for decades to come, not only in technology, but in mechanical systems. And in we want the infrastructure for space planning to allow flexibility in classrooms for years to come.
Space, and then the other thing that we have problems with is electrical, especially as I'm sure you're aware.
I can speak to that one since I've been through.
Is that the one outlet per room? Probably?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the things have come a long way since
that,
those
not having enough power and not being able to bring more in.
Yeah.
Well, if you could be satisfied with one outlet per room, you would have enough power. But that is so.
No, we're not satisfied with that.
Right. I hope not. Yes.
Ever.
Yes. Right. Yeah. But wow. Electricity.
And that was in the 50s, Frank. And when Pilgrim was built, well, 40s, 50s, opened in the 50s. But it's interesting that there's one plug per room, and even in our houses back then, we had 2 or 3 or 4 plugs in a room. So it's really quite a mystery to me as to why it was developed. Although I suppose
to plug in the film projector.
The film projector.
Yeah. And I think Ed and I are responding with good confidence, because we are looking at wholesale replacement.
And I know you're going to do that.
And built as new today with current state-of-the-art standards.
And the ability to upgrade. So that's great.
And ability, yeah. Well, state-of-the-art standards would include ability to upgrade and change over time.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Dr. Thornton has a question.
I have a question. I think maybe for Ed. I know we haven't talked about it much, Ed, but at our middle school at Veterans, we did a new HVAC rooftop unit, and replacing an old steam system. In both Tollgate and Pilgrim, we have the antiquated unit ventilators, right? The boiler rooms that look like the boiler room on Poseidon Adventure. So could you take a second, just take us through what is coming in the future as far as heating systems? What's changing? What's driving the systems you're putting in now?
Yeah, so I think, before we even go there, I think there's always the discussion regarding the level of air conditioning and that the impact on the budget, the initial cost that goes with that. And if that isn't used, then other means to lower humidification and make spaces comfortable. Of course, what you see these days, not surprisingly, is increased ventilation, increased filtration. But I think, at the end of the day, you're definitely looking at moving air. It's not going to be like, it wouldn't be the unit heater.
And while you're on air, currently the state of art is MERV, I believe 13. That's our COVID, filter. Are we going to see MERV 15? What are we installing in 2 years? Any sense of what's changing?
Possibly. This is going to be a CHIPS building, so there's going to be a lot of discussion about both energy efficiency, air quality, and we'll be obliged and sort of forced into looking at the latest. I think we're going through it right now. So, there'll be even more changes on the horizon. what we're doing in school right now, the one I was just referring to in Fitchburg, they won't be having air conditioning in the classrooms. They will in the offices. But one thing that they were very adamant about and we're providing is a lot of operable windows. And I think that's something that maybe went by the wayside a ways back, and you see that coming back again. So I think that's a very important trend. We've seen the daylighting, of course, for quite a while, but just getting that fresh air in, not just mechanically, but by opening windows. So I think that's going to be a big part of what's going to come back again.
I have one more, Dave. You want to go first?
Go ahead.
I have one more in terms of, I think sometimes people are a creature of their environment. In terms of lighting, what do you see changing as far as like, is it the same kind of, tones being reflected down on us? Anything changing with lighting in terms of what we're going to see?
I think with lighting, we see smarter fixtures that go off when you leave a room. You see lights that can adjust their intensity based on the amount of daylight that's coming in. So there's a lot of, as far as energy efficiency, you're seeing those types of upgrades. As a matter of fact, I think perhaps in vets, you had some of these types of LED lights installed at some point. You're going to see smarter controls within classrooms and throughout the building that are more integrated, automated control systems. Frank, what else are you seeing these days?
Well, you pretty much covered it. It's essentially a matter of designing new lighting patterns that really do pay attention to how banks of lights can be turned off and will be turned off automatically depending upon the ambient light conditions outside. There's also, shaping of ceilings to bounce the light further back. In the old days, didn't matter, it was just all straight. So even a slight tip in the ceiling line can do that. Use of up-down lighting fixtures to bounce reflected light, to bounce some percent of light off the ceiling and lighten the ceiling and make the rooms basically operate much more efficiently with the same amount of light fixtures. So, I mean, all of these are clever designs that have popped up in the last 10 years and related to energy efficiency, and of course LEED standards is driving a lot of this, and it creates a new consciousness. So it's well, I would just have to say it's exciting.
Thank you. I guess, I don't know if the question is for Mr. Locker or Mr. Bourget, probably more for Mr. Baxter or Mr. Ferrucci. Mr. Locker, you referenced early on that when you do a construction like this, the state does help reimburse you.
Yes.
So Mr. Ferrucci or Mr. Baxter, I believe our base reimbursement rate from the state is currently 35% or 38% or something like that.
That's correct, Mr. Tester. It's 35%. There's incentives for doing certain things that are expiring at the end of December. And we've been advocating with our state leadership to extend that for another 5 years, so that would be applicable for the high school projects. Currently, we're getting 5% incentives on a number of initiatives. Up to 15%, we would be able to get 50% back.
Right. So this is roughly a $300 endeavor here. So on the low side, we get 35% of that back, which is about $100 million, right? So
correct.
And then on the high side, it could be financed by half. So I mean, that's the nature of the beast, right? It's just the way these things operate. That you're not going to change them except to try to influence our delegation to help extend those incentives, which make perfect sense to extend incentive. So, what the taxpayer actually pays is roughly 2/3 to a half. That's what the locality is on the hook for in this project. And Mr. Locker, you did say something at the beginning of your presentation. You talked about 21st century learning environments, longer class periods, offering CTC in both of our schools, which is something that the community groups both wanted, I should say. and then, you know, synchronous team teaching. So, you know, we can do this, right? We can go forward and make these buildings really 21st century, but, you know, sometimes we may also have to change what we do inside of those buildings versus what we're doing today. So that's not for you, that's for everybody else. But, you know, I think
Yeah.
common sense would tell you that there are some practices that we may have to adjust, right?
Oh, well, yes. You know, sharing the vision with the educators, with all of the educators, and embarking on a process of professional development is paramount. And in fact, that should be done while the buildings are in design and construction, so that the educators anticipate the new opportunities they're going to have. And in fact, they can be adopting a number of these despite the limitations that their current 21st century buildings give them. Take the notion of synchronous teacher teaming. That can be done with teachers in 2 rooms side by side. It could also be done with quick and dirty changes made by your facilities crew of cutting a hole in a wall on a weekend. And yes, it's not pretty, but what we're trying to do is try out the educational ideas, know how they're working, make adjustments to them, so that when the buildings are ready to come online, then everybody's running full speed ahead. And I guarantee you that if those steps are not taken with professional development and trialing out these concepts before the building comes online, then what'll happen is that all of the educators will come in the building and they'll try to make it look like the old building, because that's what they know. I mean, I will say that for all of the challenges in making new buildings, making renovated buildings, that part of the equation is relatively predictable. And it's been done before by the pros that are going to be doing the work. Changing the educational model, carrying out professional development, the human resources side is the more sensitive and more difficult challenge. So yeah, you got to start right away.
Yeah, because when you mention longer class periods, I mean, you know, I understand what that means. This block scheduling, get long periods, and
Yes.
And as I said last week, my kids went to Pilgrim. I've been in Pilgrim and I've shadowed students. And Pilgrim is the type of school I went to, and I went to school a long time ago. And if I'm going to spend 80 minutes on a class, it would be nice if I had a lot of light coming in, if the environment maybe not mind wanting to sit there, right?
Yes.
You're stuck with what you have right now, and I understand that, but I think, you know, we have to view the school also as, it's just another workplace too. It's another workplace in the sense that kids are learning, that their job is to go to school and learn, teachers teach and whatnot. So, you know, when these kids go into the workplace, they're probably going into buildings that are more modern than the school they came from. So, you know, to have a school reflect what they'll see 4 years or 3 or 4 or 5 or however many years out of high school makes a lot of sense to me. You know, as I mentioned last week, Pilgrim to me is like an assembly line. It's a hall with rooms. So in the room on the left, you build this. In the room on the right, you build that, and go all the way down the hall. It's an industrial mindset. It's an industrial model, which is just not good.
Yes, we've moved away from that, and you know, if there's any mantra for 21st century learning, it might be personalized learning or student-centered learning, but these ideas are interrelated with each other. You know, you change the schedule to give 90-minute periods, and it was cited in the report to allow for deeper learning. What that means is the current shorter schedule chops the day up into small segments, thus limiting how much of a deep dive students can do within a period. But if you do extend it to 90 days, and that is the common national standard for high schools, and it's called a block schedule, and you either do a year's course in one semester or you alternate your days so that the course still takes the same duration of overall calendar time. But if you go to a block schedule and the teacher's got 90 minutes at his or her command, the last thing that teacher can do is lecture, because that does not engage students. The teacher, if the teacher has been used to lecturing as their primary delivery, they need to shift to something that engages students more deeply, and make it the 90-minute experience that kids don't want to leave. And we talked about that. We explored that in the visioning, and your stakeholders identified the most effective ways for students to be learning in our high schools. And one of those was project-based learning, where students are engaged in doing things, making projects, working with each other, collaborating, doing what they will be doing as they move through the rest of their education and go into the work environment, because that is the way the work environment is now. So there's a good number of things that are tucked into the vision. They're integral parts of the vision that have phenomenal facilities implications for making buildings, but they also have phenomenal professional development implications for the human resources side of the equation. And that should be unfolding as soon as possible.
Thank you very much.
Dr.
Just
Thornton?
for the committee, just to remind the committee, a couple of years back, a team of teachers and administrators did spend over a year studying schedules and came back with a block schedule for Warwick that was presented to the school committee. So, Mr. Locker, they have discussed that. That was on the table a little while back.
That's great. Yeah. Yep.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Cornell.
Yeah, so, yeah, first regarding Pilgrim, like whatever, direction we go, I would like there to be a lot of, fields, or like, if we move the school to a new field, I would like it to be replaced with a lot of open space area, because like, students they like to do sports, and I just want there to be a lot of open space there, because so they'll be able to do that. So, as for Tollgate, I like the idea with the courtyard, or that that whole the hole in the middle area with the glass windows. What'd you call it?
We called it the heart of the school, and it's
Okay,
the media. Yeah. It's the media center done in the manner that a food court in a multi-story mall might be, that would draw several different floors together, sharing the light, but understanding each other's presence.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the food court area, because I think there's a lot of potential with that. I think we could really make that nice. Plus, I like the idea of having all the classrooms around there with the windows around that food court area, because I went to Tollgate and I had classes in areas where there were no windows, and it's not as good as classes with windows.
It's tough.
There are a lot of classes at Tollgate with that, and I think that could really be good for the students for educational purposes. And also, one good example of a classroom with windows is Windman. They have some of the best window classes in the district, and because it has good views, because Tollgate's on hill, so it's one of the highest areas in Warwick. And I think another possibility, maybe we could do a lookout tower, so people can see all Rhode Island from Tollgate, which could be a unique thing we could add to the school.
I love it.
There's a lot of possibilities here, and I'm excited for it.
Yeah, that'd be a real celebration of that unique site.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Locker, what will be our next step from this? I know that we had all the community, before COVID, and we had a great turnout, but unfortunately, we didn't get what we were hoping for tonight. What would be our next step after this?
Oh, you mean in terms of community engagement?
With
Or in the big
process.
picture?
With the process.
Okay, well, I think that that question is a great issue, but it's probably best answered by Anthony Ferrucci. Sorry, a little tongue-tied tonight. Is Tony still with us?
Yep.
I am. Yes, I am.
Okay, there you are. Next steps?
Madam Chair, as we're proceeding, what we do need now is a school committee decision. So by selecting a plan, the school department will proceed to go to the Rhode Island Department of Education to receive support for state aid of our plan. That process will take about 3 months for the first application to be put in. At that point, There's going to be a lot of detail that will come out because that's what we got to provide to the Rhode Island Department of Education. Then we got stage 2, which would come up in February, and then hopefully have support of the Rhode Island Department of Education by May of 2022. And then we'd be going to look for voter approval for a bond in order to finance it. That would be November 2022. Design for going out to bid to contractors would be the following year, 2023. And we'd be able to break ground in the summer of 2024. So I think what we're really faced with is what plan would the school committee like us to pursue as an administration and as a project planning team.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ferrucci. I guess we'll have to get that on the agenda sooner than later. Well, with no other questions, I want to just,
Madam Chair. Oh, Ms. Bacchus has a question.
Marcus,
You said we have to get that on the agenda sooner rather than later. I would recommend that it be its own meeting, because I think this is a very significant issue, and we shouldn't be rushing through to other issues to get to this or get
Well-
to this and then rush through. So I don't know. You're the chair. I mean, you do what you want. It's just
it's not about on the chair, Ms. Bacchus. It's the fact that we have a meeting on the 6th, a meeting on the 13th, and then we have budget. So I don't know how we're going to manage that, but I will look at how much line items we have on the 6th and the 13th. Thank you.
we used to have weekly meetings.
Okay, well, future.
Madam Chair?
meeting- Oh,
Sorry.
yeah, sorry, I'm sorry.
So I don't really have a question for Mr. Locker, Mr. Bourget. I just wanted to thank you for all the work that you guys kind of put into here. Like Mr. Cornell said, he went to Tollgate. He's very familiar with it as of recently. I recently graduated from Pilgrim, even though it was 2010. But I really appreciate all the work you guys have done. I'm like excited to see where we go from there.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yes, I
Exciting.
am too, very grateful for what you've done for us. So we'll just go to future meetings. We have the Health and Wellness Subcommittee meeting on March 31st at 4 o'clock. We have a special school committee meeting on April 6th. We have the monthly school committee meeting on April 13th, a special school committee budget meeting on the 14th, and a special school committee budget meeting on the 20th. So at this, yes, Ms. Bacchus.
I had asked last time. I still haven't seen any mention, but
It's been posted, Ms. Bacchus.
is it going to be open? The Health and Wellness Committee.
It is open.
Thank you. I asked for the public that are watching this.
Okay, so I just need a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Everyone have a nice night.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.